So, our speaker, we're very lucky to have Cal in town tonight. We've had a few unicorn founders here. We've never had any 5-time unicorn founders here at Startup Grind. But it's important to know that none of the speakers at Startup Grind get paid. They give their time and pay it forward. So as a Startup Grind tradition, we get everybody to stand on their feet. And let's give a big Startup Grind welcome for the co-founder and CTO of Slack, Cal Henderson. Welcome to Sydney.
Thank you. Thank you.
Try that
Now.
Testing,
Is it working?
Testing.
Hello.
Yep.
All right.
So, welcome to Australia.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. What are you doing back in Australia?
It's kind of a dumb story, actually. So I'm on vacation in Japan next week. It's like, well, if I'm going to Japan, I may as well go to Australia because they're really close together. Fuck, it's so far. It's really genuinely a long way to come here.
Well, I think Slack needs a Google Maps plugin or something.
But it is great to be here, and I love coming to Australia.
Cool.
Especially to be here for Anzac Day and experience some real Australian culture. Played 2 Up yesterday, saw some extreme drinking. I feel like I really understand Australia now.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, what I want to do is jump back a little bit and talk a little bit about your story. So I can sense a British accent there. So tell me, where did you grow up? And obviously you became a coder. So what led you into coding? Just to find out a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, so originally born in England and grew up there, and I got into computers at a super young age. Had like an older cousin, and he got a computer, a Texas Instruments TI-99. Is anybody familiar with that? Oh, one. All right, yeah. And so it's like, well, now it would be a piece of shit, but it was amazing. It was the first computer I'd ever seen, and it had a basic interpreter built in, and you could write software. And I was like, wow, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I mean, up to that point, I probably wanted to be like an astronaut or a fireman or something. But then I was like, no, I want to be a software engineer. And I haven't really changed since. Then grew up that way, broken, and then saw the internet, and I was like, wow, I could make something that literally hundreds of people would see. And from that point on, I was like, I'm all about the internet and the web. And it hasn't really changed from then.
And did you start off like programming websites for people, like contracting yourself out? How did it start off?
Yeah. I joined like a web agency at the end of the 90s and was like making websites for brands and then websites for magazines, really living the dream. And I never thought I'd do I definitely didn't see myself as entrepreneurial, and I never meant to leave the UK. That turned out to be an accident. And I just like wanted to make stuff on the web, tried to make like a lot of games, kind of stuff when I was in school. And then while I was working in London for a magazine company, I saw this like massively multiplayer online game that people were making in 2001. And it was called Game Never Ending. Is anyone here familiar with Game Never Ending? So about 100 people were, and it was just incredible. It was the first time I'd ever seen anybody try to make an online game where people played together over the internet. And I was like, wow! And also it was like crazy browser tech at the time, so it was the first time I'd ever seen like a web page that changed without you reloading it. Because it was like pre-Ajax. It was using like some weird IE hacks in an iframe to reload things, and you could like chat with people on a web page. It's like, this is not the future, but this is super fucking cool, and I just want to work at this company. I want to work on this project. And so I harassed the founders for 2 years over AIM and through weblogs, and by getting an intro from a friend of mine over email. I just harassed them consistently for 2 years until they gave me a job.
And that company was?
And then that company was making a video game in Canada in 2002, 2003, like post-WorldCom, Enron, global financial collapse. They had no track record. They were just like designers from a web agency in Canada making an online game, which wasn't a thing that existed. So they weren't able to raise any money or get any investment. So that wasn't working out. So they were trying to figure out a way to make some money on the side, do some kind of quick project that would be able to fund development of this game. And that quick project on the side that I joined to build became Flickr, the photo sharing website.
Well, I mean, I remember when Flickr first came out. To me, it was like one of those first Web 2.0 sites. Like, what was the growth like there at Flickr? How did it just take off?
Well, I mean, it was a different time back then. We started in 2003, 2004, and there just weren't many people on the internet at the time, relatively speaking. It was like a very different landscape to anything you think about when you think about the web today, because like nothing you use today existed. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram, there was no Snapchat. I'm a big fan of Snapchat, by the way. I use it all the time. And I'm not in my 20s. It's just such a good product. I've lost my train of thought now. And so when we built Flickr, like having tens of thousands of users was like a really big deal. We were the first like social property. And when we saw like tens of thousands of people using it every day, I was like, this is going to be big. And obviously it got a little bit bigger after that. But for the time that we were really working on it before we were acquired by Yahoo, it's like we had maybe 1 million users total before we were acquired, and at the time that was a huge number. Today that's like nothing. If you don't get 1 million users on the first day you launch, then like why are you even bothering? But at the time that was huge.
And after that acquisition, I mean, did that stall just the progress of Flickr as an application, as a website? I mean, they did a makeover not that long ago, and it was a bit like, wow, that was sort of 5 years overdue, you know?
Sort of yes and no. The thing that a lot of people like look back with rose-tinted glasses on like the era before we were acquired by Yahoo. Relatively speaking, nobody had used Flickr before we were acquired by Yahoo. Like our user base grew like 100-fold in the first year. So most people who like look back at that time, it was like actually after we were acquired when we first started to really get a lot of growth, and that was really because Yahoo as an acquirer was running the biggest website in the world at the time by a long way. Like they were number one for a number of years after we were acquired. I mean, the business model's dumb and they're failing and everything, but they were still really big and they could drive a huge amount of traffic. But it was unfortunately like a couple of years into that, as we were starved for resources, and especially the thing that went wrong for us was that mobile started to become a really big deal. We were acquired in 2005. It wasn't until the year after that the iPhone came out. It wasn't until a couple of years after that the App Store came around. But then like Instagram just fucking killed it. And the Instagram experience was so good that shifted the way people thought about photographs.
Yeah, interesting. With so you decided to leave Flickr at a point in time. What was the catalyst for you leaving Flickr?
So I'd been at Flickr post-acquisition for about 4 years, and the original founding team, we knew we wanted to get back and try and make that game we'd been failing to make originally. And like we achieved a bunch of things we wanted to with Flickr. We'd like finished out some projects, got a good team in place to kind of carry it on, and wanted to get back and not build exactly the same game that we were building the first time around, but like a version of that reimagined for where technology had moved. And it was a pretty different time when we started the second game in 2009. Did anybody play Glitch, the game we made? Right, one person. That tells you why it worked out so well. It was a very different time. Like technology had moved on a lot, but also there'd been a lot more online games. Like online games were a thing by then. Like the massively multiplayer RPGs had come out, and it was around the time of the rise of Zynga. So like Farmville was out. The Facebook platform was enabling those kind of social games, and it's like, well, now maybe there's money in this. It seemed like that was going to be the next massive industry, and at the time, Zynga was still on the rise. And so it was a very different environment. We wanted to get back and make the same kind of experience that we'd thought about the first time around, but in this new modern era of a lot of people, playing together over the internet.
So during this process, somehow Slack was born, is that right? Do you want to just talk me through how that kind of happened?
Yeah, so sort of. So we spent 4 years and a lot of other people's money making a game that ultimately didn't work out. So I think 3 years into it, and definitely by kind of towards the end of the 4th year, we realized that, well, we'd finally kind of arrived at something that was sort of fun, sort of enjoyable, and people were starting to play. It was never going to turn into a business that would justify how much we'd invested in building it. It was never going to become a successful company. So like the best possible case would be like maybe a lifestyle business smaller than the company was at the time. And so we realized that we needed to shut it down, like it just wasn't going to work out. And so we shut the company down and had to lay off most of the employees because it was a lot of like artists and animators and sound design. And we knew that we weren't going to make video games anymore because we're fucking terrible at it. It was the second time we'd failed to make the same game. We're genuinely quite bad at this. So we knew we'd need to shut that down. And we're trying to figure out, we knew we wanted to keep working together because we have a team now who have been working together for, in some cases, 20 years by now. We really liked working together. We knew we wanted to build something, and we're trying to figure out what we wanted to build next. And we had like a long list of possible things we could work on. Number one for a long time was we're going to start a bank. The rationale is fairly straightforward. It's like everybody hates their bank, so very low bar for doing a good job. And also, banks literally make money, so how can you fuck that up? But also kind of super boring, and also heavy regulation. Like, if you're building a photo sharing site and you lose someone's photo, it's like, that sucks. You're building a bank and you lose someone's money, that's fucking terrible. Like, you can't move fast and break things with people's life savings. So we're like, okay, maybe not a bank. And when we were talking about what we wanted to do, we realized that whatever it was we did next, we wanted to keep working together in the same way. And so from the beginning of building the game, 4 years before that, when we first started out, we started using IRC, Internet Relay Chat. And IRC is not usable by normal humans, but we were all like old internet nerds and we'd used it in the 90s. And so we started it with the four of us, but as soon as we hired anybody else into the company, they're like, what the shit is this? So we had to start fixing all of the big holes that are in IRC. The biggest one being that if you're not online at the same time as somebody else, you can't receive a message. So let's start logging all the messages. And then if we've logged them, let's put search on top of that so we can find the conversation from last week. And then, well, if we've got search and messages on a web page, let's let you send messages from that web page and make it work on mobile. But then the kind of big shift in how we started to communicate and work internally was that we started to kind of post a lot of information into IRC. So anytime somebody signed up for the game or bought something in the game, or we did a code check-in or a server rebooted, or an artist uploaded a file, a piece of art, and we needed to approve it before it went into the animation pipeline or into the game engine. And then the more information we were posting in there, the more people paid attention to it. And the more people paid attention to it, the more you wanted to post everything into there. And it became like just the center of how we worked as a team. And so by the time we shut the game down and wound the company down, we found that we hadn't sent any email for 4 years. We hadn't sent a single internal email, apart from like benefit selection once a year. And so we knew this worked really well for us, and we would want to keep working the same way. So if it worked well for a development team like us, it would probably work well for other development teams like us. And so that's where the idea for Slack came from.
And where did the name come from? Was that a working title? Did you come up with that later because you're able to get the domain name? I mean, funny enough, SendGrid's original name was smtpapi.com, like pretty bad.
It's catchy. Yeah, I like it.
The engineers loved it. Yeah, that went really well with them.
God, naming things is just increasingly difficult because, our criteria were we had spent whatever it was, 6 years having to spell out Flickr every time we told people about it. It's like flickr.com. No, there's no E. Yes, that's correct. Sorry for starting that whole thing, which is never going to die. It's like we wanted a simple word that you could tell people, like when you're talking to a person in real life, and that was, fairly short and had the .com because people don't trust any other TLDs. Sorry, and that was an English word and that we could afford as well because we didn't have a lot of money left. But Slack was originally like a code name because for like the first year, I thought it was the worst fucking name. I was like, God, we have to come up with a real name. The reasoning behind it was that, like in project planning, you have your critical path, and then the extra time you have is your slack in the schedule. So the idea was if it makes you really productive, then you'll have more slack in your schedule. But it also means you slack off and not do any work. So it's not the best possible name. I have now come to love it as a name. It seems pretty good, and like the logo looks nice and everything. So yeah, I mean we're stuck with it now for sure.
So tell me about the day you launched Slack. Did you send it out to some friends, or how did it get out there?
So a product like Slack is super annoying. like from an adoption point of view. So say, you start some new software service and you're trying to convince all your friends to use it, and you just come off the back of 4 years of failure. So they're like, yeah, sure, I'm not going to try your garbage product. You have no idea what you're doing. So that's difficult enough, but in terms of Slack, you're not just convincing somebody to use it, you're convincing somebody to convince their whole team to try it at the same time. So like the barrier to entry is super high, and it's like, somebody on that team is going to have had a shitty day. They had a fight with their partner in the morning, like they're fighting with their boss. They ain't got time for your garbage. So like that barrier is really high. So our first alpha testers, we went out to our friends at other startups in San Francisco and just begged them like endlessly. It's like, please, I will come to your office. I will walk you through the setup. I will help everyone through the setup. I will come and watch how you work and try and understand what it is you do. Everyone's like, no, that's super weird. Get out of my office. I don't even know you. But like just super persistent, like begged, borrowed, and steal from our friends to give it a go. And our first few users, it was really eye-opening in like that terrible way of, if you watch like, if any of you make software and have ever watched your parents use it, you're like, I want to kill myself. I'm so bad at this. And it was really like that at first, because we had built a product that worked really well for the 8-person company we were, if you were super familiar with IRC and had been using it for a decade. And so the first iteration of the product was so painful to watch people use. But we brought on a few companies initially and just like spent a lot of time like on site with those companies, watching people use it, trying to figure out what the problems were with adoption and kind of understanding how to get on board. And like for the first couple of months of our private alpha, we just spent a lot of time iterating and trying to get to an experience that made sense for people. And like the product changed so much over those couple of months that it wouldn't really be familiar to anybody if you saw like the original alpha. And then we kind of just kept on iterating in that vein, working like expanding the alpha, expanding a beta, and just talking to a lot of customers about how they could use the product.
And was there like an inflection moment where all of a sudden you went, oh my God, this is taking off bigger than we ever thought it could? Or was it gradual kind of growth? Or there must have been a moment where you went, wow, this is growing beyond us?
Yeah, it's a little more like the latter, like, when you boil a frog kind of thing and they don't realize that they're gradually dying, but in a good way. And so it was like there was never really a point at which it's like the trajectory really suddenly changed. It was very gradual, like it started, more and more companies used it, and, like continuing up to today. And we've been a live product for about 4 years now. Now, I don't know what the numbers are, like tens or hundreds of thousands of companies use it. An awful lot of people use Slack every day to get their work done. And it's been a very gradual growth over that whole time. So it's like, it really has, I think, crept up on us. When we put together a pitch deck for when we were like trying to decide what project we would do, and we put together a pitch deck for codename Slack, because it was a codename. And the vision was like, one day, decades from now, if we really do everything perfect, this could be $100 million business. So we really had no idea how big it could be, but it really just creeped up on us slowly.
And I want to talk a little bit about your co-founders. Co-founder relationships are extremely tricky. Some say that marriages are easier than co-founder relationships. Talk to me about your co-founders and why this group of people somehow make it work as a group. Yeah, so we're an interesting group of people. We are both diverse and not. We are white bearded men from all around the world. So I'm originally a Brit. Co-founder Stuart's a Canadian. We have an American and we have a Russian. And we all come from pretty different backgrounds. Like I'm the only CS background person there. Like Stuart was a philosophy major. Eric was a designer. Sergey studied metallurgy, I think. And came to Canada by way of Brazil and was he's our back-end crazy Russian scientist who worked at a bank and writes Java. And then Eric, our front-end co-founder, was did anybody work on the web in the early 2000s and use Glish.com, which was an original reference for how to do CSS-based layouts? That was our co-founder Eric, so he was super front-end. I'm a generalist who's not super good at anything, and Stuart's a really good product designer and thinker. So we have very different kind of perspectives that we bring to things. We're not just I think there's a temptation, or often I've seen with co-founders,
Well, the worst possible combo is like when you co-found something with your partner. Terrible, don't do that. But the next worst one is like when you find somebody who looks just like you, who has exactly the same background and exactly the same skill set, and it's like you have a lot to talk about, but you don't have a lot of different things to kind of bring to the table. And I think like once you find that set of people who both, you have complementary skills, but you just like can really get a groove working with, because you're going to have to, like, if this is successful, or even more so if it's not successful, you're going to spend more time with them than you spend with anyone in your life, than with your spouse. You're going to spend more time with them than you spend sleeping or eating or whatever it is people do. And so you have to be really happy spending a ton of time with them. That's not the same as like them being your best friend, but it's somebody you're going to have a very long relationship with if it works out.
I want to talk now about growth and scaling. Obviously, with Slack, I think we've got more than 6 million daily active users. So there's obviously been, I would assume there's been some growing pains in that growth curve, but not just growing from infrastructure, hiring and people. Just talk to me a little bit about what were the lessons learned from growing at such an aggressive rate.
I think there's a lot of things learned as we've grown and we continue to grow. I think the biggest thing that I've seen is that kind of anything from like a people or process point of view that you put in place, you will be throwing away. And you kind of expect that when you're like an initial startup, when you're like 2 or 3 people, you're like, well, it's going to be different when we hire our first other person, and that's going to change a lot. But that change kind of continues every 6 months, especially like when I look at the role I play within the company and what I do day to day changes really significantly every 6 months at least. It's like still very evolving, even at the scale where we're at today, where we have 1,000 employees across like 9 offices. It's still, the nature of the work changes so much as like everything grows and breaks. And there's this kind of like, from a software point of view, we say like, if your traffic grows 10 times and nothing breaks, then you like built it, then you over-engineered it to begin with. Like, you want to be somewhere ahead of the curve, but not so crazily far ahead of the curve. So, if you build the massive foundations, then you're going to miss the boat on fixing the problems that matter today. And I think like it's a kind of scary situation to be in perpetually, and it's exhausting as well. It's like whatever you have in place today is gonna fall apart tomorrow. And there's a certain kind of mindset that you need to hire around for that. It's people who, when you're a very early stage startup, people are taking on a lot of risk joining your company, and they're expecting that there's going to be a lot of change and that their role will be fluid and evolve over time. And then when you're like an old established company, it's the opposite. You interview for a role and you expect that role is going to be the same for the next decade. And that we're in this weird like adolescent stage in the middle, whereas like we seem like a big company because there's a lot of people and we have a lot of revenue, but at the same time, like we're still like doubling our headcount or like more than doubling our traffic year on year. And so that role is really going to evolve. And
talk to me a little bit about the company culture, or the culture within Slack, because if you're hiring and growing at such a pace where potentially more than half the employees have been there less than a year, that culture can change super quick. How have you made that work for you?
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of necessary for the culture of a company to change and evolve over time. And I think what's important is that as you grow, understanding the things about the culture and the way you operate and like your values and your decision-making framework, the bits that you really care about and actually are like key to you as a company, and the bits that are just necessary at this point in time. And kind of, because you don't want, for us, like as a company, 10 or 100 X's in terms of like number of employees or revenue or users or whatever, we don't want it to feel, it shouldn't feel exactly the same, like we should probably grow up in some ways and, and abandon ways that we worked in the past, but understanding what it is that we think is like key to how we want the company to operate, and like holding on to those things and kind of enshrining them as values. So that both comes from like the values side, like what are our unique values, not just like we value hard work and transparency and like doing a good job, like fucking everyone has those values, but like what are the things that uniquely identify us or we think set us apart a little bit, but also like what are your kind of operating principles, what are the frameworks that you're giving people to be able to make decisions inside of. It's like when you're if you're like a 10-person startup, everyone knows what everybody else is doing. It's very easy to course correct. It's very easy to stay in sync. As you grow as an organization, you can't like have a top-down command and control model and have any kind of efficiency. So the part of culture that's really important to disseminate to people and be the thing that carries forward as your company grows is how do you make decisions within that organization? How does work happen?
There's an expression you hear in startup land, which is that if you have to ask if you have product market fit, you probably don't. Why do people love Slack so much? There's no doubt that I chat to people. I'm not a big Slack user. I go in there when I need to, but there are people like dragging me down the hallway going, you got to use Slack. These are people that just like absolutely massive advocates. What is it that they're really falling in love with, do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one is that there's been a change kind of in workplace software over the last decade, where it used to be that software in the workplace kind of led technically and experience-wise, and the consumer space followed behind. Like the real cutting-edge technology was in business. And that has definitely flipped around over the last decade to where the best tools and experiences are in the consumer space, like the rise of like Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, that are so good at building software experiences because their model is getting a lot of people in and keeping them. And people, especially as like the younger generation moves into the workforce, people are expecting those kind of experiences in the workplace, and that's especially true of messaging now. So like with the rise of like WhatsApp, iMessage, Facebook Messenger, people aren't typically emailing their like spouse or friends anymore. Like we've moved on to the right communications tool for different sets of people, and so that's opened up a kind of space for doing the same thing inside the workplace. And from our point of view, what we try and do with Slack is that we look a lot at the kind of the end user experience, like what it feels like to use Slack as a person at a company. We're not building enterprise software, which is, God, it sounds so depressing, enterprise software, but we don't build software for the enterprise by thinking about who we're going to sell it to, by thinking about like what is the CIO, the VP of IT, somebody in purchasing going to think about this, because they're the person we have to trick into buying a whole bunch of licenses and then we're done. We think about like what will it feel like for people to use this, because if it is both like enjoyable in a slightly playful way and it makes you more productive or feel closer to your team, feel more connected to your company, then that's going to be successful.
Sort of leading on from there, how does Slack see the future of work? Because you feel like now you've got to a stage where you're kind of changing the way companies are communicating, and I suppose you're changing the nature of the way they're working. How do you see that going into the future?
I think there's kind of two big shifts that we'll see. One is a gradual shift towards more transparency within organizations. And that's, if there's kind of one thing that we try and push on our users, like a philosophy that we're trying to like push out into the world, it is that of greater transparency inside organizations can greatly increase productivity. In Slack, at the core of that is the channels model. The idea that instead of your default way you communicate with somebody is one-to-one, it is many-to-many. And it's fairly simple concept. It's not very hard to explain that to people, but it's like you get kind of first order transparency benefits that like everyone in your group or team is privy to the communication about the projects that you're working on. But you also get that kind of second order transparency effect of like other groups within your company have a much more ambient awareness of what other people are working on, and that can have it's not as much of an immediate benefit, but can have a lot of positive upside over time. We found as we were working on the game that there's a huge benefit to the engineering team knowing what the marketing team was working on, the marketing team knowing what the pulse of the customer care team was. Not in a way like where you'd go and attend their meetings every week or read their minutes, but being able to kind of dip in and out of that stream has a huge benefit. So that's the transparency piece. And I think what the other part of it that the kind of transparency can help power is the idea of the kind of agile workplace. Not like capital A software agile, but the idea that as more and more organizations are made up of knowledge workers, and more and more companies primarily consist of knowledge workers, the idea that a company can be agilely respond to problems and challenges. That is, like, a project comes up and you can gather the right people from across an organization, not just within one particular silo, within one particular department, but the best people from an organization to solve a particular problem, for them to come together, work on that problem, and then disperse and go off and work on other problems. So, like, that transparency can help aid flexibility like that in the workplace.
Cool. About 15 years ago, someone gave me the book by Bill Gates called Business at the Speed of Thought. I never actually read the book, but I thought it was an interesting concept. I mean, I still own it. It's still in the light. It looks nice in the bookcase, but just the idea of business at the speed of thought. I mean, how agile can Slack make teams, or how agile can software and how productive can software make teams, do you think?
I think, you know, any software tool, a tool like Slack, is just can't change the behavior of people by itself. Like, it can be a catalyst for organizational change, but it's not going to, changing human behavior is very difficult and slow and error prone and painful, and people are super resistant to change because, like, what we have going on right now is probably good enough, so let's never change that for the next 1,000 years. But I think that tools can definitely help either kind of be a catalyst or be like a lens that helps to amplify the changes that you want to already make. So I think it's like Slack is not going to cause it's not going to be the reason that the workplace is changing in general. It's like we happen to be at the right time and have caught this wave. I think that this move towards like transparency and especially channel-based communication would have happened regardless of if we had built Slack the product. Somebody else would have been there instead. So I think that this is, you know, like, it's just a catalyst to a thing that was already going to happen.
I don't usually do a lot of research on people that I interview, but I did watch one YouTube clip yesterday, and I gotta ask you, there's something called Halloween inside Slack. What is this Halloween thing?
Oh, it's super fucking weird, and I'm not into it at all. But 4 years ago, somebody at Slack decided it would be funny if everybody dressed up like me for Halloween. So I have a fairly distinctive uniform. I wear a plaid shirt every day, shorts and sneakers. And so and glasses. It's like quite easy to dress as me. And so it was super weird and funny the first year when we had 30 employees. And last Halloween when we had 750 people all around the world dressing as me, it was creepy as fuck. So hopefully it's not going to happen again, but it is super weird. Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, look, because when I first met you, I was like, oh wow, he's wearing the same shirt as he wore in his press kit. But then I realised that's actually how you dress.
I just have a lot of shirts that look a bit like this, yeah.
That's cool. Hey, what we're going to do now is switch over to questions from the audience. We've got a few there queued up, so we'll just, there's a few that have been voted up to the top. So the first one, how do you hire a great team?
It's not like I have a lot of wisdom, genius wisdom around this. Hiring people is really, really difficult. The most useful piece of advice, which I still find it very hard to follow myself, is fire people really quickly. When you hire somebody and you often know they're not going to work out on day one, definitely week one. And then, you hang around, they hang around for 6 months as you try and find them the correct role, and maybe they'd be better under a different manager or with a slits, we just got off on the wrong foot. It's fire people quickly and then hiring decisions are a lot less painful. Can you fire people in Australia?
It's tricky.
Yeah, all right. So you can't do that. So then interviewing and hiring anybody is just super difficult. The longer you spend with people is obviously a huge advantage, but then that's a big cost if you're a young startup. So on the engineering side, doing realistic programming work as opposed to these terrible gotcha quizzes that people do, or code this thing on a whiteboard that you would never have to do in your real job. Also, you're not allowed to use Google. I can't code shit without looking at Google. It's super unrealistic. So, the best processes that we've seen from anybody is where you go and do pair programming with somebody, but there's a big cost on that. So, oh man, when you're an early stage startup, it can really make or break your business. And this is why people hire people they know, and that's certainly what we did when we started. We hired a lot of people from Flickr. And so we have quite a lot of people from Flickr in the founding team. But the people that you hire early on really set the tone for who you're going to be able to hire later. And like we especially saw this, if your engineering team, if you like grow to 50 people and you're all white dudes, you're not going to be able to hire anything but white dudes. So like thinking about that early on, thinking about not just hiring people who look like yourself, not just hiring people who came from exactly the same background as you, doing that early is super valuable as well.
Awesome. You got 700 people that look like you.
for one day a year. And it is the worst, so don't get into that situation.
Okay, so how as CTO do you communicate and manage your devs to achieve the vision of Slack?
I think a lot of this was kind of what we touched on earlier, which is that like I don't make many decisions. Like ultimately, what I see my role kind of twofold. One is the health of the can the organization remain healthy such that we continue to execute? And a lot of that is if we want to push decision making down to the edges of the organization. So individual engineers and line managers like have the ability to make decisions and move things forward, then what's important is setting like our values and our kind of like mission and our vision of where the product's going, along with a decision making framework. What are our operating principles? How do we want to work together as a team? And like making sure that is. There's this, it's probably a Ben Horowitz thing, because he says a lot of super clever stuff about startups, that repeat stuff again and again until you are so sick of saying it, and at that point people will start to remember what you've said. Like you have to just keep repeating your like values and your operating principles over and over again every day. And especially at the rate we've been growing, most employees at Slack have been there less than 18 months, so they probably haven't even heard anything 100 times yet. So you just have to keep hammering it home forever. The other part of it is like the long-term vision, making sure that whatever we're building today meets the right balance of what we need today versus what we'll need a couple of years from now. This is very easy to get tunnel vision on the immediate problems, and not be building for slightly further out.
Yeah, I definitely concur with the Ben Horowitz comments. He's got some books, I think. I haven't read them, but I'm sure they're great.
Yeah, you don't really get a lot from just the title of The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's actually quite a good book. Yeah. I mean, I've read like a quarter of it, but that quarter is pretty good.
I actually met him in the Valley once, and he said, I'll tell you the secret about this startup thing. And I was like, oh yeah, Ben, you're going to tell me the secret? He's like, yeah. He goes, 9 out of 10 startups are B2C, and 9 out of 10 IPOs are B2B. And I went, that's pretty good. You're B2B?
Yeah, I guess. And B2B just doesn't seem as exciting, does it? Because consumer tech is just a lot more fun. But God, we just make software and sell it for money, and it's such a good business model compared to ads. It's just so much more straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone fantasizes about sitting around a barbecue and everyone's talking about their app, right? But it's not, it's sexy, but it doesn't make a lot of money. So.
Yeah, but that does happen a lot, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's not actually warm enough to have a barbecue, but like sit inside, yeah.
Next question. Who here watches Silicon Valley on HBO? Well, you got to watch it. It's first time I saw the series, I laughed so hard on a Qantas plane, the hostesses came out to see if I was okay. So the question is, which character in Silicon Valley do you relate to the most? Are you Dinesh? Are you Guilfoyle? Are you Richard? Guilfoyle's a little weird though.
I can't remember the name of the character. What's the nerdy one who wears the vest and does the finance side?
Jared.
Yeah,
Donald.
Yeah, Jared probably.
Okay, nice one. Bit of fun there. We just thought we'd break it up. Where does Slack see the future of emails going?
Well, I don't think email is never going to disappear. Like, it's literally never going to die. Cockroach of the internet. We will hate it, but it will be around forever, like in our floors and ceilings and whatever. I assume there's cockroaches in this building too. Do you have cockroaches in Australia? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have them in England. We don't have, in fact, any kind of thing that can kill you in England, apart from English people. Yeah.
Football fans.
Oh, future of email. Oh God. I don't think email isn't going to die. 100 years from now, when the robots have killed all of us, taken all of our jobs, they are still going to have to email each other. And they will hate it, and it's mostly going to be spam and notifications from Facebook and Twitter. And I think it's not going to go away, but what we're going to see is it being continually marginalized, where situations today where you have to use email are going to switch to some other medium, and email will be relegated to fewer and fewer use cases. And I think, like with Slack, we've seen that with internal communication at companies. Like LinkedIn is taking the load of like new introductions for people in the workplace and stuff like that. Like young people don't use email to talk to each other; they use Snapchat. And so I think we'll see it used in less and less situations, but it will never die.
Yeah, this is the second startup grind in a row where my age is being dished, so we'll just try and get off that one. But I mean, like chatbots, right? A lot of people mean, chatbots are going to take over email, and like to be honest,
chatbots are super dumb.
If like Pepsi jumps in and does, wants to talk to me, I'm like, go away, Pepsi. This is where I chat to my friends with Sean and with Lockie and people like that. Like, did everyone get a bit too excited about chatbots?
I think so. I think like that's a dumb trend. Like I don't think the future of AI is going to be talking to Pepsi on Facebook about how much you love their brand. I think that was a little bit short-sighted. And we do have like, I don't know, because often like these really stupid uses of technology like precede some kind of useful and interesting use. I'm definitely not sold on conversational interfaces, but maybe like the Alexa and Google Home and stuff. I don't know. I'm skeptical of everything, but then like predicting the future is nobody is ever any good at it, and it's so difficult. So who knows? Maybe that's the future of fucking everything. It's going to be super depressing.
Yeah, I mean, we have a Google Home, and I'm trying to figure out what the etiquette is because I'm trying to teach my kids that they should say please and thank you to OK Google, but I don't know, should they?
It's tough, and when the robots rise up, they're going to kill everybody who didn't say please and thank you. I just hired somebody onto my team called Alexa, and it's fucking confusing.
Yeah, that's not gonna work. That's the fast fire, I think. Yeah. And this leads into the next question is a great one. Does Slack currently make use of machine learning, either in the product or within the company? And where do you see the opportunities for Slack or for AI ML into Slack?
Yeah. So we do. We use ML in a bunch of places, and I think that like the current uses or the current abilities of ML is what's really like when people talk about like AI and actually being like AI suddenly being useful and usable. It's really like not the robots, killer robot side, but definitely the ML for a bunch of mundane things. It's like today we use a bunch of machine learning in Slack search. So if you search for something in the desktop app, as well as like returning like matched messages, we'll also say like if you search for this project, here's the people who seem to know the most about this topic. Here are the channels in which it's discussed. We do a lot of that by ML models, and also things like if you're away from Slack for a couple of weeks and you come back and you have all of these unread messages, we can rank the channels in order in which we think you will want to read them based on your previous behavior. And so there's a whole bunch of ML models happening in the background, and I think we'll start to see that, and we are starting to see that in a whole host of products. And it won't be super obvious. It's not like, wow, this is amazing machine learning magic. It's going to be things getting like a little bit better by being informed about your particular behavior. And Google search has worked this way, for many years. Like the results that you get when you search for something are pretty different than the ones I get when I search for something based on our behaviors and a model that they're building to squeeze every last millionth of a cent out of our ad revenue. And we're going to start to see that applied to everything.
And does that conversation happen in virtually all conversations with the product? When you're having product conversations, is that element always there?
I think so, a little bit. We're trying to, it's like sprinkle a little bit of ML magic over everything. It's definitely something that we talk about. And it, whenever we're kind of building anything, but it's like you don't expect to really see it at the forefront. It's just something which we can add a bit of ranking to everything and make it a little bit better.
Awesome. How has life changed for you professionally and personally now that you're this billion-dollar founder? I assume mum's pretty proud, is she? Does she have a press clippings kind of book? Or
she genuinely has no idea what I do. She knows I work on computers and that I can fix the printer, and that's kind of the extent of it. Yeah, no, she's a retired teacher, and she has email. Actually, I got her a smartphone last year, and now we're on WhatsApp, so yeah, getting up there. In the next decade, she'll understand Slack. My role in the company has changed really significantly over time. Initially, when we started the company, I would write code and be a programmer. I don't write any production code anymore, which is good for all of the engineers who do work at Slack and are good at their jobs. but like my role has really continued to evolve very like my responsibilities change like month on month, and like the structure of my role. I spend an increasing amount of like portion of my time talking to other people about Slack. Like I spend a lot of, in fact, I guess I spend nearly all of my time just talking to people about things and reading my Slack messages, but mostly talking to people, whether it's customers or people in the startup ecosystem, you know, or people internally. It's you know, there's this like myth of the kind of the engineer as like a solo rock star who like goes into their basement for 6 months and codes something and comes out with a like perfect golden egg of product. It's like, that has never really been the case for anything successful. Engineering has always been a real team sport, and like knowledge work of any time, you know, kind is a team sport, and especially building products for other human beings. And so like, sure, like being able to program computers is pretty essential to the role of being an engineer, but being able to work with groups of people, you know, like those social skills are pretty important.
So you mentioned to me earlier today that you don't do any angel investing, that you're very focused on Slack. At a point in time, there'll be a day when, you know, Slack isn't your day-to-day thing. What do you want to do next? Would you build another startup? Would you become an investor? Like, what would you do? What would you like to do next?
Oh, I hope I work at Slack for a long time and I just continue to back shit on Kickstarter, which is my equivalent of angel investing. I have a lot of garbage that just get like, I'm like, God, did I really back that? I don't need like another internet-connected keyboard thing. Actually, I really love mechanical keyboards. I have so many. But I think that like, you know, we've really demonstrated that we can't make video games as a business. But
you do one more go. One more go. Come on.
When I retire, I think I'd like to make a video game not as a business and not with the goal of being financially successful, but with the goal of being a terrible money hole into which I pour all my time.
You could also buy a horse or a boat. They're also great money holes. So.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I could be successful at that, so it's not so much a challenge.
This is a great question. What apps do you like to use, apart from obviously Snapchat? And what apps and software does Slack love to use?
I do seriously use Snapchat like all the time. I send so many photos. I mean, not like, you know, proper millennial level usage where they have 100,000 points, but I have like 50,000 points on my current account. Wait, what else do I use? I use Twitter all the time because everybody has to. I still read BBC News because there's not real news in America. GitHub, God, I love GitHub. It's really really changed the way that changed the way open source works in such a positive way. Like Git is a terrible nightmare of confusion, but GitHub really like changed social coding in a really interesting way. Other interesting services. Oh, God, I don't know. All I do is like read email and Slack messages. Not email internally with my team, email for other people outside of Slack, to be clear. Yeah.
Cool, so last couple of questions. So do you hire for experience or natural intelligence?
Natural intelligence. I'm not sure that that's really a thing. Like, I mean, definitely hire people with experience, because that's like, you know, like nothing really beats actually doing a job for real. Like any, you know, education is great, but like a month of practical experience is better than like 5 years of studying something without actually doing it. Like I didn't really learn how to be a software engineer at university. I did computer science, but like once I actually had a job, I was like, oh, this is what programmers do all day. It's like look up shit on Stack Overflow and like curse themselves. But I think one, you know, of the things that we hire for, it's like like teamwork and social skills. There's a huge part of that. How can you collaborate with people? How good are you at sharing ideas and discussing problems? You know, as much as the mechanics of typing things on a keyboard, like the coding skills, you know, can be learned, but like teamwork and collaboration is a lot harder to learn if you're resistant to that. But really, like on the junior end, when you're not hiring somebody with, you know, with a huge amount of experience, it's really about like a hunger and an eagerness to learn, because like I don't know much about software engineering in the grand scheme of things, and everything's all new all of the time, and like 14 JavaScript frameworks came out while we were in this session. It's like nobody knows everything that's current, you know, like you have to have a passion for learning and for understanding new things.
Fantastic. How do you feel about the reply all button in emails?
God, emails are such a hot mess of garbage, aren't they? And I really held out on using Gmail for my personal mail until like 3 years ago. I'd been running my own mail server for a long time and had it set up just the way I wanted it. And now with like the threaded view on Gmail or like the normal view, like if you just reply to one person out of a few, it's like so confusing. But God, I hate email. Sorry, whatever.
Yeah, Gmail haven't quite got the threading bit sort of correct.
But yeah, email's just horrible. Like, you know, I worked in email companies, obviously in the past, pre-Slack, and like when you're on one of those reply all chains, like the whole company, 10,000, I was working for this publishing company, had I think like somewhere between 5 and 10,000 employees, and there was an email chain about please don't reply to this email, and it just went on for days until the Exchange server crashed, and they had to like delete all of the emails and start over. It's like, to me, that is the essence of email.
What is Slack planning on doing for GDPR? Hopefully you're already doing something. So GDPR is the new European EU regulation around privacy and anti-spam and provenance of data. What are you doing in that regard?
Oh, it's an interesting set of regulations. Obviously, we have to comply with them because we do business in Europe, and so we have a whole bunch of changes that we made to comply with GDPR. It's interesting because there are, it's mostly a set of regulations that is to help consumers on the consumer side. So there's a bunch of interesting things that you have to do on the kind of B2B side. One of which is the way that the right to be forgotten applies to us at Slack. It's like somebody after they leave a company can want to be forgotten for their internal communication, but the company owns their actual communication. You just can no longer attach their name to it. So we had to build a feature for that in Slack, and it's super weird. We'll see if anybody ever uses it, but we had to build it.
And we'll finish up with this last question. This is obviously from a founder who's trying to consider their future, which is Bootstrap or venture capital funding.
I think it really depends what you're trying to do and what you want to do. You know, the reason that you take venture funding is because you couldn't do what you want to do without it. If you want to really accelerate your company by whether that's like capital investment or investment in people or advertising dollars, then figure out what you want to raise and raise that money, and don't raise like a lot more than you need. It's super tempting. The more you raise, the more you'll have to become valued to be successful. So raise as little as you can get away with. And if you can bootstrap, that's cool.
Now, you've done a number of rounds with Slack. Anything on the horizon, any sort of liquidity event, anyone from Microsoft rang up and said, hey, look, let's have lunch, let's have some noodles or something.
Is that how it goes?
I don't know where it came from. I'm winging this, right?
Yeah. We are pretty interested in keeping this an independent company and just focusing on continuing to build our user base and build the value of the product. So nothing to share there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we had our last speaker was one of the founders of Canva, and it was a little bit like the Zuckerberg thing, where once they turned down the $1 billion offer from Yahoo, that they were then on a course where they were just going to sort of keep going. It seems like maybe you're in that space. Would you say that?
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Oh, wow. I thought I might get something, maybe a little slip up.
Oh, you almost got me.
I'm dealing with a pro here, folks. Hey, Cal, look, thank you so much for your time this evening. Congratulations on the success of Slack around the world and here in Australia. I know you've got quite a big office, about 50 people down in Melbourne. And we love that you come here to give your knowledge so freely to founders that are here in the room. So please give it up for Cal Henderson.
Thank you so much.
So that concludes the event. I think we're out of food, but there are hopefully still some drinks over there. So please meet some people, say hello, go with the attitude of how can I help you. Cal's going to hang around for a few minutes and say hi to some people. So if you want to come up and say hi, please do so. Thanks for coming to Startup Grind. See you next time.